Well, today is one of those special days in our country where we recognize one of the great leaders in the past. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday recognition is today, and therefore a lot of people have the day off and aren't working. But I am really honored to have back with us Dr. Richard Land. He is the president of the Southern Evangelical Seminary, one of the leading apologetic seminaries in our country. And he wants to talk about how the examples of Martin Luther King Jr.'s life is an example of redemptive forgiveness. And Dr. Land, nice to see you again, my friend. How you doing?
I'm doing great. It's good to see you. Let me just give you some good news. We had a 66% increase in winter term enrollment, and we've had about a 135% increase in applications for the spring semester. So we're feeling encouraged around here.
Well, by the way, ses.edu is the place to go to find out about the seminary. You were taking a sip out of your mug a few moments ago before you went on the air, and it's a beautiful mug.
Well, thank you. It's an SES mug. I'll tell you what, I'll send you one.
Oh, okay. Nice to see you, my friend. And by the way, if people who are interested in the seminary, go to ses.ed.
ses.edu.
Yeah.
And when they go there, let me tell you, we got an incredible deal for free. They can find out how to download the SES app. And the SES app has almost all of the speeches at all of our conferences. Guys like Norm Geisler and Os Guinness and William Lane Craig, all these people, and you can just download it for free.
Wow, that's wonderful. Thank you. Well, welcome to your new position. And what made you write on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.?
Well, Dr. King's been a hero of mine since I was a teenager. I surrendered to the ministry in 1963 when I was 16 years old. And about 3 weeks after I surrendered to the ministry, I watched Dr. King's speech on television at the Lincoln Memorial, the I Have a Dream speech. And fortunately for me, I had always been raised in a home in Houston, Texas, where I was taught that racism not only was wrong, it was sin. But when I listened to Dr. King's speech, it became very clear to me that my ministry had to involve not only knowing that it was wrong and saying that it was wrong, but speaking up against it whenever I encountered it. And at that time, alas, I still lived in what was largely a segregated society. Mm-hmm. 1963 was before the 64 Civil Rights Act and the 65 Voting Rights Act and the 67 Civil Rights Act, which largely did away with legalized segregation in the United States. And I was profoundly moved by his ability to, he always said, those that you would change, you must first love. And I thought, if he can love Bull Connor, the racist, brutal police chief in Birmingham, and he can love George Wallace, the segregationist governor of Alabama, then I can love people too. And looking back on it, I'm more and more convinced that it's very difficult to imagine how we would have gotten through this terrible period in our history without a lot more bloodshed, had it not been for Dr. King's commitment to nonviolence and his ability to practice that transformative love. Those that you would change, you must first love. Wow.
Boy, let me skip ahead and come back. What do you think of the race issue today as it relates back to what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was doing?
We need Dr. King. Mm-hmm. We need him desperately. I'm very saddened to say that I think we have not made near the progress that we would have made had he lived. That America is still far too racially divided. The evidence for that erupts periodically with the O.J. Simpson trial, with the Trayvon Martin case. It erupts, and we see that there is still a deep racial divide in this country. And there are too many people who are attacking others and throwing around the term racism if you disagree with them, instead of practicing the kind of transformative love that Dr. King practiced. I was very gratified to hear Dr. King's daughter talk about the way to honor her father would be to cease aggressive actions, cease aggressive attacks, cease aggressive speeches, and reach out in love and reach out in reconciliation. That's what her father did. That's what her father would do.
He was an incredible orator, wasn't he?
He was that. He was the best I've ever heard. I've never heard anyone that was as eloquent as he was.
What do you mean, Dr. Land, by redemptive forgiveness?
Well, you forgive, and you forgive with the object not only of that's what the Lord commanded us to do, but in trying to use out of that forgiveness, redeem the other. You know, the New Testament tells us if someone requires you to carry their pack, their burden a mile, carry it 2 miles. Mm-hmm. And then they want to know why. Why'd you do this an extra mile? Because God told me to, because Jesus loves you. Mm. Dr. King understood that everyone was shackled by segregation, not just black people. White people were too. And I have said on numerous occasions that probably the people who benefited the most from Dr. King's ministry and Dr. King's life were white Southerners. Because black Southerners, while they were terribly victimized, at least they were innocent. Dr. King liberated white Southerners from their racism and from the guilt that's associated with suppressing people and victimizing people.
Wow, what a statement. Do you think that Dr. King's spirit and message transcends civil rights and equality?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Yes, I do. I think it does. I think people forget that he was a Baptist minister.
Right.
And that the Montgomery bus boycott in Montgomery, Alabama, which was really the official start of the civil rights movement, was planned and organized in the basement of the Dexter Memorial Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. In Selma, Alabama. This is, it's in Montgomery, Alabama. People forget this. People forget that his church was just a stone's throw from the state capitol. And he understood the New Testament teaching. Jesus, perhaps the most misunderstood and abused scripture in all of the Bible, is one of the most familiar. It's the Lord's Prayer. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done as earth as in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us as we forgive our trespassers. Now, we just rattle that off and we don't think about it. Do we really want to pray that? Do we really want to pray, Lord, forgive me the way I forgive my wife? Lord, forgive me the way I forgive my ex-wife? Lord, forgive me the way I forgive my boss? It says, forgive us as we forgive our trespassers. The Lord in the Lord's Prayer is teaching us to forgive. And it's the one thing he goes back to immediately. Immediately after the Lord's Prayer, he says, if you don't forgive others, the Lord's not going to forgive you. Now, he's not talking about our heavenly salvation, but he is talking about the fact that an unforgiving spirit poisons the receptacle that holds it. And whatever anybody has done to you or whatever anybody has said to you, it's not worth what it does to you to harbor an unforgiving spirit in your heart. And we are to forgive those who wrong us. To forgive those who have abused us, and to reach out and seek reconciliation with them. The Lord teaches us, remember in the gospel, if you come to the altar and you remember that your brother has aught against you, you go to your brother. Or if you remember that you have aught against your brother, you leave your gift at the altar and you go and you be reconciled, and then you come to the altar. Now, what I say is that means in marriages, if a husband and a wife have a fight and she goes and slams the door to the bedroom and he goes out in the garage and pretends to be rearranging his tools on his tool chest, that they're going to meet in the hallway and they're going to be reconciled.
Very well said. Let me take a break here, Dr. Land. In fact, you remind me of something that one of my Bible school professors said: if you don't forgive, don't take communion.
That's exactly, that's a very wise statement.
Okay, we'll be right back with Dr. Land in just a moment. Well, today across the country we are recognizing one of our great leaders of the past, and that is the late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And with us today is Dr. Richard Land. He is the current president of the Southern Evangelical Seminary, one of the leading apologetic seminaries in the country. And let me encourage you, if you're interested in attending there or maybe hearing some of the speeches of their guest speakers in the past, you can go to ses.edu and find out more about the seminary and certainly some of their past guest speakers. And today we're talking about the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And Dr. Land, do you think that that now that here we are 50 some odd years later, and he obviously has been politicized, maybe even to the point where ministers, evangelists, and pastors don't use his wisdom and his writings and his speeches as illustrations?
Well, some don't. I think he's actually less politicized now than he was during his lifetime.
Good.
I think that there are a lot of people in my generation who used to criticize me when I first started quoting Dr. King back in the 1970s, because they still perceived him as being part of a radical movement, and there were all kinds of propaganda was spread about him, that he was a communist and all. If you were alive back then, he was an extremely controversial figure,
right?
Because he was shaking the establishment to its core, and it needed to be shaken to its core. I would really encourage all of the people who are watching, if you ever get to Atlanta, take at least half a day and go to the Martin Luther King Museum and Burial Site, which is right there in the middle of Atlanta. It's the best use of video that I've ever seen in a museum, and it's right across the street from his boyhood home and where his burial site. And it's one of the most visited places in the world, in America, from people outside the United States. We tend to forget that Dr. King is a hero of immense proportions in the second and third world, around the world, perhaps even more so than in the United States. But I would say he's probably more quoted now and more beloved now than he was during his lifetime or shortly after his lifetime.
Yeah, I would say you're correct in that. In the seminary that you're president of and teaching apologetics, do you encourage students to use him as a part of their means of defense of the faith?
I do. In fact, I'm going to be speaking in chapel tonight. We are open today because we have classes. 60% of our students are online. So people all over the country are coming to our school, and we have classes at night, and so we had to have the class. So I'm speaking in chapel. We have a chapel every night, and I'm going to be speaking tonight on Dr. King and on his legacy and on the fact, Dr. King once said, he said, the media watch, they have the lights on and the cameras on when we're talking about what we're going to do, but they turn them off when we talk about why. And he said they'll never understand the what because they don't really understand the why. And I remember one television reporter, when Dr. King died, they said, now this service is in a Baptist church, which is appropriate since his father was a Baptist minister. Well, Dr. King was a Baptist minister, and you can't really understand Dr. King apart from the fact that he is a Baptist minister.
Just as a side note, have you ever read the book Start With Why?
No, I haven't.
I would suggest it's a secular business book, but you may want to read it because it explains exactly what you're talking about right there.
I'll start with why.
Yeah.
Right. I will do it.
Yeah. Where is that courage today that Dr. Martin Luther King had and the boldness he had when our culture is crying out for that kind of moral courage today?
Well, I think it's being expressed in different places. People who are speaking out against the cultural ethos of same-sex marriage, and in spite of the penalties they're paying, are speaking out against it, and people who are still speaking up for the sanctity of human life when there's a price to be paid for that. But you know, people talk about persecution and discrimination. Very few people are endangering their lives to speak out against same-sex marriage, and very few people are endangering their lives to speak out against abortion on demand. They may be threatening their career, or they may be threatening a breach among some family members, but the vortex and the milieu in which Dr. King was operating, it's a miracle he lived as long as he did. He was fighting against people who were willing to blow up little girls in church to maintain white supremacy, and who were willing to do heinous things. And he had massive death threats. And it's really a miracle that the man lived as long as he did. And, you know, I was thinking about it this morning. Dr. King died at 38 years of age. My oldest daughter is getting ready to turn 40. My oldest daughter is older than Dr. King. And I can tell you, from my perspective, 38 is awfully young to die.
Yeah, yeah. You would think with the election twice of a black president that the racial issue would calm down, but it doesn't seem to have been.
No, it doesn't seem to have, and I would have thought the same thing. I mean, you know, people ask me about Barack Obama, and I obviously disagree with most of his policies. But the two things that I like best about Barack Obama is, number one, he gives every appearance of being a devoted, loving father and husband, which is a model we need in the White House, and that he's an African American. But unfortunately, his policies have probably harmed African Americans more than any other particular group in terms of his policies for the economy. Obviously, as a black president, that's not been his intention. But if you look at the black unemployment rate, and you look at the different groups demographically and how they've fared economically, African Americans have probably fared more poorly than any other group economically under this president. And they're obviously, not going to blame an African American president for this. And so I think that the general lack of economic growth and the greater separation between the haves and the have-nots, which always comes unless, the way to lessen the divide between the haves and the have-nots is to have growth. And when you don't have growth economically, that divide tends to widen. And then there have been those who have been quick to attack anyone who disagrees with President Obama about anything as being racist.
Yeah,
and that's just simply not true. But that charge poisons the atmosphere,
right?
And it poisons the debate. And it's also very dangerous because it makes it more difficult to identify real racism when it comes along. It's like the little boy who cried wolf.
Yeah.
You cry wolf all the time, and when the wolf finally shows up, nobody recognizes it.
Where do you put Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson in this argument?
Well, I don't put them together. I don't put them together. I would argue that Jesse Jackson has a much longer track record and a lot more personal bona fides in his personal commitment to the civil rights movement historically than Al Sharpton. And this is a personal opinion. I believe that Reverend Jackson has behaved and does behave more responsibly. I think that Al Sharpton says a lot of irresponsible things on his television show, and sometimes not on his television show, and that he has been part of the problem, not part of the solution. But that's just a personal opinion. I don't think that's his intention, but I think that's the reality.
So where do we go from here, Dr. Lamb? We seem we are more divided on this issue than ever, and for reasons that you have previously explained. What do you tell people of faith? What's our role in this?
I think we have to be intentional. We have to be intentional reconcilers. I think that we have to not only denounce racism, we need to reach out and establish interracial relationships, brother to brother, sister to sister, family to family, church to church. And I think ministers need to take the lead in this and reach out and establish personal relationships with African American preachers, and let your parishioners see you socializing with an African American pastor and his wife and his family, and then bring together and have joint deacon retreats or joint elder retreats, and not just pulpit exchanges, but where you actually have relationship together. You know, I challenge my friends all the time. I say, how many African American friends do you have? Not acquaintances, not business associates, but actual friends, people that you socialize with. They're in your home and you're in their home. The most voluntary moments in American life are the most segregated moments in American life. And that's got to change. I think we've got to practice colorblind evangelism. We've got to reach out and seek to have as a goal that our churches will reflect the demographic breakdown of the country. That's what God would intend, is there would be no difference in the ethnic makeup of a church and the ethnic makeup of a community. Got to go,
Dr. Lamb. Thank you. You're inspiring. Let me just include ses.edu if you want to learn more about the seminary. Thank you, my